because I've had experiences here where I've brought things to the attention of the people that are in a position to make those changes. All right, I'm not, but I brought that to the attention of the people who are in the administration or are in a position to make those changes, and I want to see those changes made. I want to be constructive about this. I don't want to tear down people. I want to try to build up people. And the last thing I want to mention is that last year, when the Coming Together series was discussed among the new faculty, I also brought up the need for training as well. I didn't feel that the Coming Together series, those were speakers, those were not trainings, and I made that point abundantly
As a faculty of color, I need to address this issue,
okay.
and I think you are taking a lot of space. First of all, as a minority of color, as a faculty member of color, you personally addressed and challenged me at my office door, saying, why didn't we as a union protect you when we did our best to defend you and address your concerns, and yet you come to a faculty member of color and charge her for not protecting your needs. So I refuse to listen to you grandstand and co-opt this student meeting. That's what I have to say.
Get out! You're not helpful. Get out!
Can you listen to your shirt?
Get out!
Milkshake and chill. You need to go.
That was the line of the day.
I feel like you just.
This is the kind of shit we put up with, George.
No.
And you just saw that.
You saw that.
How do you feel?
George, you cut him a paycheck.
Get out!
John, as one of your classmates, get out. So.
But George, that's a prime example. He was standing right in front of you, and you did not do a damn thing.
You were holding him. Hold his paycheck and fire him.
Hold on. You were just holding him. You saw him go from 0 to 60 just like that. If he was any closer, he looked like he was gonna jump at her. I felt like he threatened her.
What do you think
in front of
happens in the
everybody.
classroom when you're not there?
Who? You just saw that. Did you feel like that's the same person?
Hey, close the door.
Community love.
Community love.
How are you going to keep me safe on this campus? Because that man appeared to be tall. I don't know, never seen him, but had I been in the room, I would have been very afraid. If he was willing to do that in front of 50, 100 people, live streaming, what is that person willing to do when nobody's watching?
And we'll plot for the next one. If you're in the white shirt, you're gonna be held accountable. You stand up in the white shirt right there. You don't get to just act out in front of people like that. That's fucked up. You don't just get to. I don't even know the words right now. Y'all know what he did. Y'all seen the video. Look at him, see his face. You're gonna be held accountable to the community. Whether the institution does it or we have to do it. There's the call out.
They are sprucing up the campus, I noticed.
How so?
They were out there with the weed whacker yesterday, taking care of the weeds, so apparently they are expecting people to arrive.
Okay.
But to a limited extent and safely. And that, of course, is a moving target, as you can imagine. I mean,
yeah.
For example, San Diego State University wanted to open up more classes, and now they've had to curtail those openings of face-to-face classrooms, openings of classrooms for face-to-face teaching. So a lot depends on things that are out of people's control, like how people are going to behave. It involves freedoms, but also involves responsibilities that people have, and people have to be able to take responsibility for their own actions. And unfortunately, in a pandemic, other people bear the consequences, not just those people that choose to take whatever actions they take.
I want to ask about responsibility, since you brought up responsibility.
Yes.
When did you start at the Evergreen State College?
So I started Evergreen in the fall quarter So I guess technically that would have been late September in 2015, fall of 2015.
The same time as George Bridges, though.
Essentially, Dr. Bridges arrived at a later time. I think it was about a month or so after I arrived. So I actually have had 2 presidents that I've worked under. Both Les Perce and George Bridges, and then also have the distinction of having worked for 4 provosts. Four provosts in 5 years.
Is it common for turnover at the provost job, or is that uncommon the way that Evergreen's been?
I don't think that rapid turnover is desirable, but things are what they are. But I worked there when when you probably remember Michael Zimmerman.
Yeah.
So Michael was the provost who hired me. He was there for a year. Then they had an interim provost my second year, Ken Tabbitt.
Yeah.
And then Jen Drake was there for, I guess, a couple of years. And then, or maybe a little over 2 years, almost 3 years. And then David McAvity is now the current interim provost.
And what were you hired to teach?
Hired to teach business. But business is a very broadly defined at a school like Evergreen, which was one of the reasons why I decided I wanted to go there. Was I was teaching accounting. I tried to branch out into other business disciplines. I taught finance at an online for-profit university that I'd worked for. I actually taught mainly finance there, but my master's degree is in accounting, and so I taught mainly accounting at San Diego State University. It was actually exclusively accounting there. And I had taught some entrepreneurship, which involved law and marketing, a little bit of business law and marketing when I was teaching at one of the community colleges in San Diego County. And really wanted to get involved more in marketing, management, economics, and all those things and more I got to teach when I was at Evergreen. It was really, from a professional development perspective, a fabulous opportunity. Well, the faculty size there was very limited. Actually, now is much more limited than when I arrived. When I arrived, was one of 3 full-time day professors. We then hired a 4th full-time day professor, but the 2 that were there when I arrived have since retired, and I'm leaving after my summer. Well, actually, today is my last day at Evergreen.
Oh, yeah.
So I got my evaluations in and ready to pack up the car and with the rest of my belongings in my office and head back down to San Diego tonight.
What are some of the things that you taught at Evergreen?
Well, taught accounting, economics. That was the first program. More accounting in my second program. Then I started branching off into marketing and taught some operations and supply chain management, a little bit of business law to students, more economics. It was really a mixed bag. My last quarter there during the regular academic year, I taught with a geographer.
Oh, really?
Taught someone whose discipline was geographic information systems mainly, and so I taught geomarketing.
Oh, okay.
Which was very interesting, marketing in connection with place. And then before that, had taught consumer behavior, principles of marketing, advertising, social media, and marketing with social media management. I taught that with a psychologist, a cognitive psychologist mainly, but also this person taught social psychology. So the experience that I had there in terms of the classroom and in terms of teaching partners, for the most part, was high quality. But many of those people have left.
Oh, really?
Since I was there.
And left. Could you describe like the pattern of the changeover? Why?
Well, the faculty is being downsized because the enrollment is going down, and so, for example, when I arrived, I taught with 2 faculty. It was a 3-person team, which is actually now increasingly rare at Evergreen because to attract, say, 60 students into one program is now kind of a bigger undertaking. So you don't see as many of these more than pair faculty teams there, but I taught with somebody whose discipline, it was a business of art program. And I taught with a music professor and someone whose expertise was in, among other things, public policy. Then I taught with somebody else whose expertise was in public policy. Then I taught with someone whose expertise was in finance, but also that faculty member had a passion for business history.
Yeah.
And so you're able to combine these faculty and find this common ground in terms of disciplinary perspectives. And the benefit that the students get from that is just tremendous, what can be done in the classroom. The spring after I taught with this business faculty colleague I just mentioned, I taught with somebody who's a computer scientist. Then I, in the fall, taught by myself. A really interesting program. It was intermediate accounting and managerial accounting all in one program. I ended up covering 3 semesters worth of accounting work in a single quarter.
Oh, wow.
In that program. And it's because we were able to, in some programs you're able to have a lot of breadth. In this program we were able to have a lot of depth.
Yeah.
And really treat the subject of accounting after students, the prerequisite was an introductory course in accounting, but after that introductory course then we were able to go on to managerial accounting, which is accounting that's not financial reporting related, and then go into intermediate concepts in financial accounting, and we were able to really make some pretty deep connections in terms of the accounting discipline. And that's my discipline. That's really my main focus when I teach at most of the places I've taught. And so really getting into that in depth, and then teaching more marketing, and then sort of taking off with the marketing discipline.
Do you feel that students are able to absorb that amount of?
Well, what's interesting from my perspective is that students are able to, but whether students actually do or not is another story.
Okay.
They're presented with, I think, for the most part, fairly well thought out programs at Evergreen. The faculty, I think, work hard to present a quality program, but the problem is, or I don't know if you could term it a problem, but it's certainly a big issue, is that the students are arriving, particularly if it's an all-level program, with a wide variety of backgrounds, wide variety of abilities, and so if you're teaching a freshman to senior program there, you have students who are entering and are sort of an unknown quantity, and then you have seniors who may be in their very last quarter at Evergreen, and to try to tailor a program that meets all of those students' needs is very difficult. And the problem is you really can't get off the ground and go above and beyond an introductory or surface level treatment of the subjects that you're teaching without having a multi-quarter program.
Yeah.
But then students like to change programs.
Yeah.
And so the curriculum challenges that Evergreen faces, particularly with a smaller college, are fairly large.
Would you be able to describe like the ideal student for Evergreen? Like who would do really well at Evergreen?
Somebody who has a passion for learning, someone who's going there to get an education and not a degree necessarily. I think the degree is something everyone desires, but if that's all you desire, then I think your experience at Evergreen, and the same would be true for any college or university practically, is going to be diminished. And so the students who are hungry to learn, the students who are willing to look at the requirements of the program as a floor rather than a ceiling, were willing to take off and explore areas that perhaps are unexplored to a great extent in the classroom. That's the type of student that I think would do particularly well at Evergreen, provided that the class is taught to that student's level. That's the problem, is that you have students who are hungry, who are eager, who are willing to go above and beyond and achieve above minimum standards that have been set. But then how do you teach to that student and then teach the students who perhaps are struggling with a college environment, who might not be as well prepared for college as maybe they should be?
Do you think that what would be your advice for how to market Evergreen? Do you think that Evergreen's marketing to the right student, or do you think in this economy, in this situation, that it's really difficult for them to do that?
It's really difficult because the way the school has been set up. I think fundamental changes need to occur, and
I worked in legal education for 6 years, and there's a law school that comes to mind that was in the Southern California legal education market, which is where my legal education experience as a teacher and administrator, actually senior administrator at law schools was. And in order to get the student profile up to where that law school wanted it to be, to move up in the U.S. News and World Report rankings, what they needed to do was cut back. They needed to be very selective with the students they took in, develop a higher quality curriculum, and then once they had achieved that with a smaller group of students, then they could start to scale up and attract those same students on a broader basis. And so really what I think the recipe for Evergreen success would be, if it were permitted to do so, would be just that. If it wants to be a place of excellence, then you need to be selective in the students that you take in, and or you need to meet the needs of the students by bringing them up to this level where they're able to function very autonomously, which is really something that Evergreen students are required to do. Otherwise, they kind of get lost.
Okay, yeah.
And so, if Evergreen is able to provide that support, which would require a lot of resources to be dedicated to that effort, and may not even happen. Even if you dedicate the resources, sometimes the students just are not willing to sort of follow along with that sort of remedial work. But if they really wanted to have be a center of excellence, a place where excellent academic work would occur, then, and it does occur there, make no mistake about it, in places it does occur, but if it wanted to do that on a larger scale, then I think it would need to cut back the students it takes in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of the overall conception from their marketing department and their admin of what they think the school is supposed to do?
I think what the administration at the school, at least the senior administration at the school, is trying to meet the needs of underserved populations of students, students who are coming from historically disadvantaged groups, students who might not have economic advantages, even if they're not coming from historically disadvantaged demographic groups. But to meet the needs of those students, I think one can legitimately argue that they need more structure rather than less structure, because Evergreen is relatively unstructured.
Yeah.
Students need to be able to sort of forge their own pathway there. And the school is trying to address these issues, but I just don't know if the interdisciplinary programs that Evergreen teaches are amenable to creating those kinds of structures that I think that kind of student population needs.
Okay.
So either the curriculum has to change, or the mission of the school needs to be adjusted to meet the needs of the curriculum. I have a feeling that the curriculum is being adjusted to meet the needs of the students that the institution wants to serve, which means a lot of the excellent things about interdisciplinary teaching, I think ends up getting lost, because you can't have these interdisciplinary programs where students need to be self-motivated, need to be able to make connections when the students are perhaps not as well prepared for college as they should be in that kind of environment.
Yeah. So it seems that the serving of the underprivileged modus, which I think was a development or possibly one interpretation of what it means to be a social justice college, like looking at the landscape and trying to change society for the better by targeting and serving these students, that was adopted onto a model that doesn't necessarily naturally suit them.
I would say that argument could very well be made, and there's certainly going to be people who say, yes, it could be, or it is actually working that way. But I think what you'd want to do is you'd want to look at the statistics, and you'd want to look at the attrition rate. You'd want to look at the enrollment, who's coming and who's staying, and when are they coming? Because a lot of the students are coming in as transfer students, and that's probably, among many reasons, one of those would be that Evergreen is pretty liberal about accepting transfer credits.
There's very few credits that Evergreen will not accept that are transfer credits coming in. So if somebody's looking to finish a college degree that they'd started at an earlier point in their life, then Evergreen is a friendlier place to go because they're going to give you credit. In fact, they'll give you credit for life experience.
Yeah.
And so you can go there and get some credits before you even really get started at the place.
Yeah. One of the things that I studied in my post-Evergreen education, being about Evergreen, was the ways in which certain factions within the administration and the faculty attempted to change the course of Evergreen towards, very radically and very decidedly, towards social justice, towards this equity agenda. And the stats that they use to justify that switch actually fall apart when you look at the stats. So I'm wondering, because you have interacted at higher levels of Evergreen, if they are, being responsible and interpreting the data that they're collating, are they still, are they being responsible?
I don't have access to the data, and I mean, I've seen the reports.
Okay.
But you could look at that and you could say that it's suspect. And interpretation of the data, I think, data can tell different stories depending on how that data is presented. And so you can look at it almost from a classic sense of glass half full, glass half empty. You can look at the students that we're serving and doing a wonderful job serving and saying, here's our success stories. And then you can look at the students that are not being well served and say, well, this is where we need to do better. Mm-hmm. What's interesting about this, though, is that for one purpose, the glass half empty perspective is being used in terms of changes that need to be made to the institution, right? We need to do more to serve historically underserved groups of students and disadvantaged students, right? And so you hear a lot of that. The institution needs to do better. But what kind of marketing messages do you hear coming out of Evergreen? Do you hear those messages coming out of the marketing department, for example?
I'm not sure what I actually hear from the marketing department.
But those are the kinds of things where it says, yes, we're doing a great job. Yes, we're a place where students can go and feel comfortable, and that's the image that's being presented. And so one of the reasons why I bring up that you need to look at who arrives and who stays, and of course when they arrive, is that I think you need to present an accurate picture, right? There needs to be some sort of consistency in the story, and so sometimes what will end up happening is students will arrive at Evergreen expecting one type of experience, and then when they're there realize that they've actually signed up for another type of experience. Okay. And so that leads to a feeling of disconnect. And so I think it's important that the school be very candid about the kinds of students that it is trying to serve and how it intends to serve those students, and areas that it needs to shore up perhaps so that the students are coming in with realistic expectations and then will not be as likely to be disappointed after they arrive.
Mm-hmm. Because I've looked at a particular instance or particular part of the history of the Evergreen State College, and I've seen a lot of dishonesty. So I don't trust them to even be honest with themselves. And I've seen internal emails. It seems like the administration wants to present everything's fine, we're doing great, we're doing our good job, while the numbers behind them while they're making these points are precipitously falling. So I have a lack of trust that they can even be honest with themselves.
Right. One of my big pet peeves is hypocrisy. And so, if you feel like, this is a place that values transparency, and of course, being a state-supported institution and Washington State government, at least saying it's being about transparency, right? I really feel that Evergreen should be transparent in what's going on there. Mm-hmm. And they do make records available. They've made records available to you. They make records available on their website. But the problem with that is just saying we make the numbers available doesn't necessarily tell a complete story. You need someone to interpret that who has an understanding of what those numbers actually mean. That's why you pay people like data scientists to do that kind of work.
Do you think that they're being responsible in that way?
It's hard to say. It's sometimes you'll tell somebody something and they will just not get it. so it's, I don't want to say the school's being irresponsible, or I don't want to say the school's being totally responsible, because I think people can have different interpretations of that. If you asked two different people that same question, you might have one vigorously saying, yes, we are. You might have another one denying it. I think, frankly, Benjamin, the answer is somewhere in between. And a lot depends on for what purpose, right? I mentioned, for example, in terms of changing the campus climate, right? They're perhaps going to focus on deficiencies, but when they present, give an external message about the college to people outside, then they're probably going to present a different picture of the college to those people, because the purpose is not to make changes to the institution, but is to attract people to the institution, so that the institution, of course, can pay its bills.
Yeah. So it looks like Evergreen's going to be at half capacity this coming year. It looks like they'll be under 2,000 students total, which is half of what they are intended to have. And that fall off happened after 2017. Why do you think is the cause of Evergreen's enrollment dropping?
Well, I think you could argue that it's bad publicity, that the school got bad publicity as a result of the student unrest in spring of 2017. Of course, I was a little bit of a peripheral figure in that.
Your 15 minutes.
I got my 15 seconds probably there, but it's you could argue that was the cause, but I don't think that would necessarily be true, because enrollment was declining before that. I think what happened was that the student unrest in spring of 2017 accelerated that. It drew attention to some of the underlying problems that the college has wanted to address, and so it sort of opened things up there in many ways. And we talked about transparency a little while ago. I mean, the student unrest in spring 2017, I think, and the students publishing, self-publishing the videos, right, that they posted in numerous places like Facebook, I think perhaps brought a lot of things to light that had been going on at the college but hadn't really been brought to light. And so when people got to see that, then they perhaps got a little bit more circumspect about a decision to go there.
Do you think that they could have played the narrative differently? Do you think that they are culpable for allowing that 2017 unrest to define them? And if you would have any suggestion, just thinking marketing, like how do you ignore that? Do you confront it head on? What would be your ideas?
Well, the classic case, of course, is the Johnson & Johnson Tylenol scare. Another example I've used is the movie Jaws, where the mayor of the town says it's safe to go swimming, right? And there's a shark out there, but he doesn't want to tell anybody there's a shark out there. It's safe to go swimming. Or the Tylenol scare, right? We suspect that there's poisonings of Tylenol, but we're going to be safe and we're going to pull everything off the shelves. I think the key point to make in both of those cases is that transparency is the desired tack to take. And for example, let's take Jaws, the movie Jaws as an example. Sure, it's good for business in the short run if you say there are no sharks in the water, right? But we've got this huge shark out there that's eating people. And maybe the better long-run approach would be, hey, let's tell people that there's a shark in the water. Let's try to curtail their activities so that they're not swimming as much. Maybe this will be bad for business in the short run. Maybe this summer season isn't going to be the stellar summer tourist season that we had envisioned. But then what you end up doing is you end up building trust in the government of that town. And they say, we trust these people to keep us safe because they're willing to be candid with the problems that they're facing in terms of swimmer safety with Jaws out there lurking, right? And so same thing with the Tylenol scare. Yes, you're going to have a huge expense and you're going to have reductions in Tylenol shares in the short run. But if people believe that Johnson & Johnson is a company that's truly concerned about consumer safety, then people are much more likely to buy Tylenol once that scare passes, because they know, in a sense, that J&J has your back. Or, in the case of Jaws, we know that the mayor has the swimmer's back and is going to make sure that the water is safe and not cater to the needs or interests of the businesses that depend on tourism revenue. So to sort of take that principle and apply it to Evergreen, perhaps an approach that Evergreen could have taken would be just, let's be candid about this, let's admit that we have problems, and let's talk about what we're doing to resolve these problems rather than perhaps minimize them and pretend like this is something that's been overblown. What's really interesting about that is that, in fact, all of this is now sort of making all what's going on recently in political discourse is making what occurred at Evergreen even less, I say less overblown, because it's now Evergreen has become more relevant perhaps than it's ever been because of some of the things that occurred in spring 2017 occurring now in terms of the national policy discourse, in terms of Black Lives Matter and other social justice issues that have become more prominent lately.
What could you translate a little bit more? What was the shark in the water at Evergreen? What are we talking about?
The fact that the students were unhappy. There was a group of students that were clearly unhappy with what was going on at Evergreen, and they made those frustrations known throughout the year, beginning with convocation, right? The students holding up the signs. They were joined by some of their peers. The Purse Hall dedication was another situation. The Stacey Brown swearing in was another situation. And one could argue that this is just a vocal group, a small group that's very vocal, and that the problem is not a larger problem. The question is, what do you do to proactively address that? How do you reach out to those students? Do you try to meet their concerns, address their concerns somehow? And so I realize a lot of this, we're sitting in armchairs here. You could say this is armchair quarterbacking, right? Is you sit there and say, well, perhaps these warning signs were present. And then we need to address the warning signs before we end up having an incident like what occurred in spring 2017. Then in the aftermath of spring of 2017, you can look at this as almost like your Tylenol moment, right? You've got a crisis that's made Evergreen very prominent, and some would at least argue very relevant today. What do you make of that? Do you try to pretend like, do you try to push it aside, or do you say, hey, we acknowledge we have a problem here. These are the steps we're taking to address it. And even if that has a short-term adverse impact on enrollment, maybe trust in the institution, in the administration of the institution, would increase as a result of that candor and show of concern. Looking at it from the student's perspective, it's not just about getting you in the door, but once we get you in the door here at Evergreen, we want to make sure that you feel like this is a comfortable place for you to be.
In the first instance where you pop up in the Evergreen story, it seems to me that you are making conciliation to the students, and you're trying to be candid with them and show them that you're on their side very explicitly. You're kind of showing how you are helping them, and they completely deny that help from you. In fact, they turn around and go after you. Do you think that could be a sign that they are off the rails, that no conciliation could be made?
No. I know at least some of the students who were involved, and had conversations with some of those students who were involved, and I feel that if things had not escalated to that point, that perhaps steps could have been taken to address those concerns. That's just my opinion, and of course, we don't know how it would have worked out because it didn't happen.
But from your point of view, they had valid concerns.
Yes, and so in the video you probably did see that I, in essence at least, agreed that their concerns were valid. I didn't know about the individual instances that they were talking about because I just simply wasn't there. But I think that there were some valid concerns. I had observed some things occurring that I thought were concerning, and brought those to the attention of the administration. And again, more warning signs that perhaps could have or should have been heeded sooner and more decisively.
Would you put yourself at that point in history rather on the progressive side of things? Because it seems like you're arguing for equity, for social justice, for the lifting up of the marginalized.
I believe that lifting people up is the path to take. And in fact, in the video as well that you have of the I guess you could call it meeting in George Bridges' office, I said, I'd rather see people lifted up than tearing them down.
Yeah.
In order to achieve more equality, right? And we want things to be more equal, but because of equal opportunity, not because of tearing people down.
Okay.
And that was the point that I was trying to make there, is that by tearing people down, you're not going to achieve any kind of satisfying equalization of outcomes across any kinds of measures that you would want to look at.
How did that experience, being subjected to, I guess, that amount of negative attention, did that change or shift your politic, or help you understand a little bit more about the politics that you held or that you were surrounded by?
I think what it did for me is it made me realize that, first of all, how life-changing those kinds of events can be when you experience this stuff, which I never thought I would experience. The criticism that I felt was unjustified, that was leveled at me, right? Both in the so-called meeting in George Bridges' office, and then in the Longhouse meeting, right? And other events that occurred as well. I got a chance to sort of experience firsthand perhaps things that I never would have had the opportunity to experience had I not been at Evergreen.
And that's one way to put it.
Yeah, but I also want to say that there's value in that, and that I believe it makes me more sympathetic and empathetic to people who do experience these things. What I did get a sense of is that the lens through which people look at others and look at events is going to be put within their own view of the world. And so what ends up happening is a lot of what happened to me, I think, because of my physical characteristics, being cisgender male
and tall,
white, right? How could this is a person who demographically you could say, well, this person comes from a demographically advantaged group, and therefore this person shouldn't experience these things, but yet people do. There are differences within groups. And so one of the things that it reinforced, because I already felt this way, is that you need to look at people as individuals, and you need to look at their circumstances individually in order to determine the type of ways in which you can reach, in which you can work with them and educate them. And so that's one of the philosophies I bring into my classroom, is I look at students as individuals and not as groups of people in the class. And I could have two students who might appear similar but have very different motivations for being there and very different educational needs. So I think it helps to look beyond surface level, and so that's obviously one of the lessons I think that was not learned necessarily, but reinforced through my experience there.
One of the things in part of the story of just telling your story within the context of Evergreen, kind of the beginning of that story is when you kind of have a tiff or tussle with a dean who writes in your evaluation and calls you a white male, right? And you took offense to that, or was it just a legal offense?
It wasn't just a legal offense. The other part, right, of the letter was about how the students were perceived, and so it was basically how the whole classroom was run, and
or viewed by the
right. I shouldn't say actually run, because how that classroom is actually run might be very different from different perspectives. How I think the class is being run might be very different than how a particular student thinks is being run. In fact, within the group, a group of students, sometimes a student will say, "Hey, I thought that was a really good class you taught," and another student would have a different opinion about that class, and then somebody coming in to observe might see something very different than what the teacher and the group and the students individually are seeing in that situation.
But for the dean to distill everything into, or to heavily rely upon perhaps, or just to rely upon identity to make his point about privilege or power dynamics, you took issue with that. Why did you take issue with that?
I'd never seen anything like it before. When I've mentioned it to people, they're very surprised.
So why is that not proper then? Could you just, like, from a 30,000 foot view?
Because as I said in my email to as one of the emails I sent out, so I know that it's part of the public record. My race and gender should be at least irrelevant to my teaching. I've heard the argument made that my race and gender are relevant to students and that it's based on how the students perceive me, but they don't know how the students are perceiving me. They didn't ask them. And so if the academic administration is not going to ask the students how they perceive me, the only way they really know is through the student evaluations. And my race and gender was not mentioned in those.
Okay.
And so, so without asking the students, you can only imagine what the students might have been thinking at the time. And then the notion that students need to see somebody who looks like them in order to effectively be taught to them is another thing that I just simply don't get. When I'm in a classroom as a student, I don't need to see somebody who looks like me teach me, right? I need to see somebody who is genuine, who is empathetic, who has mastery of the subject matter, who can relate well to other people. But I don't need to see somebody who looks like me in order to learn well from them. I've had teachers who have been different races and different genders, different ages than me, and frankly, I've learned a lot from those professors. I've had many different types of professors and teachers over the years. Effectiveness in teaching is, I feel, in no way related to the race or gender of the instructor.
Why do you think, if you can put yourself in their shoes, why do you think that they allowed themselves to go down the path of looking at things according to identity and then applying power dynamics without even actually asking the people to that?
I think that they honestly thought that what they were doing was right. I think I don't think that what was being done. I think they thought that they were doing the right thing, and what that right thing was is, I think, a point where I depart perhaps from their thinking. The value added that the educational institution provides, to me, is in the quality of instruction, and not necessarily in who is necessarily brought in to teach according to demographic characteristics. So perhaps others' idea about what a good student-serving institution is different than my idea of what a good student-serving institution is. I want to serve students through knowledge about the subject that I'm teaching, about my ability to integrate that subject at Evergreen, certainly with other subjects that my teaching partners are proficient in, and really just do a good job with instruction and help equip the students to succeed in a world that's frankly demanding more and more of them in terms of knowledge.
Yeah. So you didn't.
you had kind of a back and forth with the admin, and then your union, and then the confrontation in George's office is between your union rep or somebody within the faculty union going after you in public. And there's a lot of different things. There was a report made about that, but that was really rooted in her calling out her identity against your identity. And then again in the Longhouse, your identity was summoned for being tall, for pointing at somebody who was shorter than you, for again, your identity was reaffirmed in that. And then the students at the end of that meeting called you out and had you stand up. You stood up. I want to ask you, what was going through your head? Why did you stand up when they called you out? Why did you face that crowd? What was going through your mind?
That's an interesting question. At the time, I felt I really had no choice. I felt that I obviously felt that the things that were being said about me were not justified, and I felt that I needed to stand up and address the person who was making those statements about me that were untrue. And so, by standing up, I did not want to. I wanted to make sure that I was perceived as not being afraid. I wanted to also be perceived as having not behaved inappropriately in that meeting, so-called meeting in Dr. Bridges' office. I don't think that I did anything inappropriate then or at any other relevant time. And so, I felt that standing up and facing those people who were making those accusations was the best way to be perceived as not agreeing with those statements.
Okay. And were you given an opportunity to state your case?
I did in the investigator's report.
When they hired a Seattle lawyer,
yes.
I believe.
Yes.
He came through and investigated your entire interaction with that rep.
Yes.
Your union rep.
So I did at that occasion, and then I also had subsequently, after the Longhouse meeting, met with a couple members of the academic administration, and I also addressed those in a private meeting with them.
If you don't mind me asking, you ended up eventually filing a case or a tort against the college, right?
Yes. There was a lawsuit filed,
and that was based on discrimination based on identity.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too much in the particulars of it. Just it's all of the legal filings that were made with the Thurston County Court are available to the public, and so those are all available if anyone wants to view them. I think it's probably, actually think it is better that they be viewed independent of any assessment or any kind of discussion I might have about them, because again, different people might perceive those documents differently than I perceive them. So I think it's probably a good course to stay on, just to say that the documents are there, and if people want to see them, they're publicly
Will you allow into this conversation that the judge ruled in your favor? Or there was a ruling? There was a decision. But again, I want people to view those who are interested to view those records, and make that decision for themselves about how they want to assess what is in that case. Well, then this is kind of my question then. Going back to Jaws, like when I look through and I construct all this time, of course I'm very biased. I have a story that I'm telling. I don't see the stories that aren't shown. I don't see the complaints of the students. They don't make their complaints explicit about what explicit changes they want, other than people being fired or they want more rooms, and there's a lot of chaos. There's not a lot of organization on that. So your perspective, you see individual instances that are valid or are valid concerns.
Right.
But the shark in the water for me is this identity politic, is this reducing of everybody into their identity. That was what is eating people alive there.
And your experience all the way up to, filing a tort claim proves that this ideology of reducing people to identity, it's not legal, at least on the as far as the judge decided, but it's also it's counter to the pursuit of an education. It doesn't really help the education.
Let me see if I can make an analogy here that sort of encapsulates my view of what's going on. So yes, demanding that professors be fired or demanding that things be done that the administration cannot legally do, those demands are inappropriate. But the students should not necessarily be expected to know that, right? The administration knows that. The faculty, particularly tenured faculty, have protections, contractual and legal protections, right? The way I perceive what occurred leading up to spring of 2017, it's sort of like if you listen to a baby crying. You've heard a baby cry before.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So a baby cries. And the reason why a baby cries is the baby is not able to communicate. A baby is not able to meet its own needs. A baby is not able to clearly communicate what its needs are. You can't just sit up and say, I need to be changed right now.
Okay.
Sit up and say, I'm tired. Sit up and say, I'm hungry.
Okay.
Right? And so, I think clearly leading up to spring 2017 and during the unrest in spring of 2017 at Evergreen, the students were voicing serious concerns that they were experiencing. But I do not necessarily think that because they don't have the same knowledge of the college and same perspectives on what's going on at the college that the administration has.
Okay.
And that's why the administration and students perhaps should have more proactively addressed this situation, is because if the two are able to get together and they can share each other's perspective with each other, then I think there's a hope that something can be done about it.
Okay.
And so with a baby crying, you can sometimes pick it up and know that's not going to get it to stop crying. And then you feed it and know that's not going to get it to stop crying. And then you finally realize, hey, it's pooped in its diaper. Now I need to go change it, and then it stops crying.
Okay.
And so I think I emphatically do not want to equate the students to babies. In fact, in some respects, I think the students might have been even more sophisticated in terms of realizing what was actually going on there than the administration was.
Okay.
At that time, at least. And so when they, the reason why I equate it to a baby crying is that they voice concerns, and I think it's up to the administration of the college to attempt to address those concerns. And until that baby stops crying, you don't stop figuring out what's making that baby uncomfortable and crying.
Okay.
And so that's the part. And again, I don't know what was done. It could have been a whole bunch of things were done, but I'm not aware of a lot of things there. And so perhaps things were done that I'm not aware of. Okay. And somebody would say, John, you're talking about things we've already tried.
Okay.
But they may or may not have been the case. But I would put out there, though, that if you tried and it didn't work, maybe you should keep trying until you finally are able to get it resolved.
Okay. So you think, just directly one-on-one, you think that my narrative that I'm imposing over Evergreen's too heavy-handed. By showing that this is what the students were trained and this is how they acted out, or perhaps it even made them hyper-aware of these identity issues and these power dynamics, so that they had a platform and the agitation to act out.
They have a perspective that you and I do not have.
Okay.
Right? They're younger. They're going to probably live 20, or in my case, maybe 40 years longer than you and I will live.
Okay.
Economically, their situation is different than mine and perhaps yours is. So as a group, they're facing concerns, and within that group, they're facing concerns from perspectives that you and I do not necessarily share with them. So I don't think that their concerns are not legitimate.
Okay.
Right? They may very well be legitimate, we might not perceive them as acutely as they perceive them. That's why the communication and sitting down and reaching some sort of resolution, I think, is very important. And of all places, I feel Evergreen should be the type of place where that would occur. So, you know, why perhaps things ended up the way they did, I really can't say for sure. I don't think anybody can say for sure. But from my perspective, we had telltale signs. And then in the aftermath, we had a way of addressing it.
Which was what?
More transparency, being frank about the problems and what we're doing to address those problems in terms of what we can do and maybe even can't do. Like the Tylenol scare, yes, it happened, but we're, you know, here's what we're doing. We're pulling it off the shelves. We're redoubling our safety efforts. We're changing the caps so that they can't be tampered with. All these things that we're doing to address the issue and being transparent about that rather than saying, nope, this was caused by a poisoner, we didn't have anything to do with it, we're just going to go about doing things the way we did before. They could have done it that way. If they had done it that way, people might have suspected that, yes, J&J didn't tamper with the Tylenol, right? But they could be tampered with again. And that's why I think the transparency is important, is because perhaps students might be, or prospective students might be left with the feeling that, how do we know that these kinds of issues might not creep up again or come up again? How do we know that this is a safe place for us? We want to see how these problems are being addressed, and acknowledgement of those problems, I think, is a first step in making sure that that the perception, at least, is there that they are being addressed.
I don't know how I would have felt being the brunt of that amount of public negative attention, and then going back to your workplace. Like, how did you deal with that? Was there like a period of like looking over your shoulder? Did you feel safe on campus? It was very awkward. It was very awkward, Benjamin. And so the following year, coincidentally, I was visiting. I was a full-time visiting professor of accounting up at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma. So the academic year after, how are we doing? We're good.
The academic year after spring of 2017, coincidentally, I had lined up a visiting position, and so for me, it was I had to work really, really hard that year, right? Both keep up things at both Evergreen and teach well. Not just keep things up and ride my desk, but teach well at Evergreen, teach well at Pacific Lutheran. The school would not give me a leave of absence. And rather than tell Pacific Lutheran University, thanks but no thanks, I can't visit because the school won't give me, because Evergreen won't give me a leave of absence, I decided that I would work at both jobs because I was so uncertain about what ultimately might happen to me at Evergreen, that I felt it would be prudent to take on a visitor position at another local university, so that if things did turn dramatically south for me at Evergreen, that I would at least have something to fall back on, and keep my proficiency up in the accounting discipline that I needed to do to secure another accounting position.
Well, why did you stick around at Evergreen? Was the promise, like leaving aside anything other than why would you work at that place that treated you like that?
Well, the school did not. Things did for a while. Things did not take a decided turn down. That whole next year, everyone was kind of on, maybe it's because I wasn't on campus as much, but things were not entirely, but certainly things did not take a dramatic turn south. So I decided that I would stay, and I did enjoy other aspects of the position. As you could tell, I'm very excited about the teaching partners I had, the subjects I was teaching, and so I looked at that as a balance. And then the students that I was serving, I felt that I was doing good work and that the students were benefiting from that work, and I was willing to put aside the aspects that I didn't find appealing, because there were aspects there that I did find appealing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing too is leaving a position without another position would have been risky as well.
Mm-hmm. Why did you get into teaching?
I had to really check that. When people get into teaching, they sometimes get into teaching for the wrong reasons. And so I actually got into teaching when I got into legal education. I was practicing at a law firm in Las Vegas. I was there for 2 years doing transactional business work, real estate, some insurance litigation work. It was at the time, the firm has now been disbanded, but at the time it was the largest law firm in the state, in the city of Las Vegas. It was a very interesting place to work, and I got exposed to a lot of really interesting people and ideas. But I got a call from the people who had helped me prepare to take the California bar examination when I graduated from law school in San Diego. And they had moved to another law school, and they wanted somebody to work with them, and ended up getting hired by the law school that they had decamped to. And so broke in, and really right off the bat, I got a call from one of the associate deans, and he said, "Hey, John, I know you're teaching bar preparation, but we have an opening for a legal writing instructor. Do you want to teach legal writing?" And I started teaching legal writing, even though litigation was not my primary practice area. I taught some legal writing. Then I taught contracts drafting. Then I taught wills and trusts the following summer. And then I got to teach other law courses that were business law related, like payment systems, contracts, and sales, as I sort of worked my way up the administrative ladder in academic support and bar preparation. So from that law school in San Diego, I went back to my alma mater, became the director of bar programs, then became an assistant dean, and then my last position in legal education was at a fourth law school where I was a visiting assistant professor of law and was also the interim director of academic support and bar preparation.
But why? Why did you keep doing it?
I wanted, same reason why I got into politics in the mid-90s, or early to mid-90s. I want to help people. I want to serve my community. And I thought that I would be able to help students succeed professionally after law school as well as while they were students.
What are some of the returns on being a teacher?
Financially or in other ways?
In other ways.
In other ways. So when I say that teaching has been a rewarding experience, I mean that in all senses of the word. It hasn't gotten me rich, but has provided me a good living. But the freedom that you have, the academic freedom, is very rewarding. I'm able to explore lots of different avenues. For example, I teach a program at Evergreen called the Business of Cannabis, which I just wrapped up evaluations for.
Didn't you get an award for that?
That did receive an award. I got, and it wasn't really me, it was the college that put my program forward, so I do want to acknowledge colleagues on this, but it did get the one of the best summer school class awards at a regional conference. And so it's been acknowledged as an award-winning class. And where else would you go and teach an integrated program like the Business of Cannabis, where we touch social history of cannabis, politics, medical issues, just all kinds of things sort of fall under this broad umbrella of social history of cannabis that we look into. Another aspect of cannabis is we look at regulation, how businesses are regulated, particularly that business, but many other businesses are regulated, some similarly, some differently. And then the entrepreneurial opportunities that not only come up in the cannabis in the direct sense, right? Owning a cannabis shop or growing cannabis is just part of the business of cannabis. The business of cannabis also includes many other types of ancillary businesses. And so we get a chance to look at all the businesses that are not directly in the business of cannabis, but are also that also serve that business. And so it gives you, in a sense, it gives you students a greater appreciation for how businesses sort of go hand in hand with regulation and with other businesses. The other interesting thing about that program is when I teach business courses, I'm looking at different businesses across. I'm looking at different businesses from the perspective of one discipline. Here, I'm able to look in the business of cannabis at one business or industry, broadly speaking, across many different disciplines. So it truly is interdisciplinary teaching. I would like to say at its finest, but I'll let my students be the judge of that.
Yeah, the way in which the Evergreen model teaches you not just what you're learning, but how what you're learning connects to larger systems and all the different functions that go on is limitlessly potential. There's limitless potential in that and exploiting that.
Right. And so that's the sort of one of the drawbacks of the college shrinking is that if there is a lot of faculty who are doing a lot of different interesting projects that students can sort of choose from, and that can be mixed and matched in a variety of ways. You're absolutely right. The possibilities are almost infinite. Mm-hmm. But as the college gets smaller, right, it perhaps needs to focus more on certain things that it wants to do well, because across a smaller college, the mixing and matching that logistically can occur gets diminished appreciably. Mm-hmm. And so, one of the sort of parting suggestions I would have for the college, and I'd be happy to make these suggestions directly if anybody cared, is to focus, be excellent, but perhaps not try to be all things to all people.
Yeah.
I realize that might go contrary to people's instincts about enrollment, that we'll get more enrollment if we say we can do more for everybody, but perhaps doing more to a greater extent for less students might be an effective way for the college to sort of launch on a path where it can, I think, truly offer opportunities to lift people up and make their lives better in, again, all senses of the words, economically and otherwise.
Yeah. What this is a stupid question, it just came to me that what's like the main lesson that you drew from your involvement in, specifically in my study of the Evergreen unrest, but like from Evergreen, what did you, is there like a couple of lessons that really hit home to you?
It just being in a different state, coming up from San Diego, being here has given me different perspectives. Teaching at a liberal arts college has given me different perspectives. Interacting with people who I probably wouldn't have interacted with. So getting a sense of sort of the larger world and broadening my own view of the world has been one of the lessons I've learned. The other thing, though, I think that's really important is, despite all the stuff that happened that one could look upon as being unfortunate, and it was in fact unfortunate, some of the things that did occur there, but the other thing I think that's important is that it's also increased my resiliency, my ability to sort of forgive and forget, to move past this, to look at the positive to look at the positive lessons that were learned here, rather than just dwell on some of the more unfortunate occurrences that existed.
Do you think that you'll be able to do something similar to what you were doing at Evergreen going forward? Do you think that interdisciplinary itch is something you're going to be able to manifest again?
I'd love to, but there's not very many places like Evergreen.
Oh, okay.
And my fervent hope is that Evergreen does more of what Evergreen should be doing, at least classically, and less of what it might be trying to do in order to sort of make itself more like other colleges and universities. And I think there's a real gem in there, and I'm just really hoping that somewhere along the line somebody can sort of bring that out. But as more of the older faculty leave, I'm hoping that can be rekindled, but it's less and less likely as that happens.
Okay. Do you think that Evergreen's a cautionary tale? And if it was, what do you think was the shark in the water? Was there a big one, or was it just a bunch of little?
I think there were signs, as I mentioned, and then ultimately things boiled over, and then once they boiled over, how those are addressed, whether they're addressed transparently or perhaps not as transparently as some might have wanted. It's, I don't know. Give me the question again one more time.
Well,
I just lost my train of thought totally.
No, you were bringing it up. You were restating the fact that it seems like your criticism if that's not too strong of a word, is the way that things were held after the fact. Maybe there was ways that things could have been mitigated to not reach the boiling point, but afterwards, the marketing and the transparency going forward.
Yeah, it's so arguably, right? And I'm not saying that they, some people might have said, no, the signs were not there, I didn't see them, and they couldn't have been seen. But at least arguably they could have been seen, and I think at least arguably, right, there might have been more transparency in the aftermath, right? One of the things in particular was the report that the trustees issued, right? The investigation of Dr. Bridges' conduct and the college's conduct in the aftermath, and how that's been criticized as perhaps not being as independent as it could have been, right? And so, some people would argue that perhaps that should have been, that review should have been taken by a more independent body, that the report should not have been given as much review prerogative by the college as it apparently was. And so those would be the kinds of criticisms that I'm talking about in terms of transparency and saying, yes, we acknowledge the things that we could have done differently that might have resulted in better outcomes for the college and the people that were involved individually.
Well, one last question for the interview. If you look at all my work since on Evergreen since I left Evergreen,
yes,
which you've seen a fair portion of.
Nearly religiously, but I wouldn't say if that. I've looked at a lot of it. I don't know if I've looked at every single one.
What kind of credits do you think that you would assign me if this was a course and I was giving it to you? Like, what do you think like were the areas that I
probably a graduate degree? I mean, the thing that's interesting, Benjamin, if I may critique you, for example, since I'm a professor and you're not a student anymore, you're a former student, is this. What's impressed me most about what you've done, even though I might not agree with all of the things that you've said and done, right? Even in this interview, I might not agree with them. What you've done is you've undertaken a serious study and you've pushed yourself beyond the confines of what your discipline is. What your discipline is really, if I'm not mistaken, literature, right? Am I right about that?
Yeah.
And so you've pushed yourself out into the sciences, statistics, all kinds of social sciences, all kinds of disciplines. You've really broadened your horizon. And to me, that's perhaps in some respect to be credited to Evergreen. I mean, I think we have to look at Evergreen as a balanced perspective. We have to look at the good and the bad. And I think the fact that you've undertaken this work, right, with varying degrees of seriousness, right? This is much more serious. I thought, for example, you're going to ask me to dress up like a pirate or something like that, right? Which, fortunately, you didn't ask me to do. But I mean,
we can do that. I have the.
You're right. I declined, right? And it's too late anyway.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I've seen a lot of growth and maturation, and I'm not saying this in a condescending way. Please don't accept this as or regard this as me putting myself above you, but I've seen you take this work, and I've seen your work evolve to really explore a lot of things that some people might disagree with, some people might find disagreeable, but nevertheless, you've pushed your boundaries beyond what you were equipped to do when you graduated from Evergreen. Frankly, that's what all of the students at Evergreen and elsewhere are going to need to do, because society is changing. Society's changed a lot since I graduated from college, and I'm not even finished yet.
Yeah.
And the pace of change is accelerating, and there's a lot of things that need to be addressed and need to be addressed creatively. And so my hope is that more students who graduate from Evergreen not necessarily follow specifically your footsteps, but follow your footsteps in the regard that they're willing to push themselves outside their boundaries, make mistakes, take risks, and go into uncharted territory, which is largely what you've done, because I don't think you really envisioned doing this when you graduated. How many years ago was it?
Well, I guess it was 3
years ago now. And so all the things you've accomplished in those 3 years, I think, are to be commended, because you've pushed yourself in ways that I don't think you had been trained to do necessarily, but yet you were able to equip yourself to do that work.
Excellent. So what's next for you?
Go back down to San Diego. I'm going to drive down tonight.
Oh, geez.
And Yeah, maybe I'll get a little shut-eye on the way, but yeah, I'm going to just be the boring accounting professor at San Diego State. Before that, I was the boring law professor. So I'm going to teach accounting at San Diego State and hopefully do well there and then see what else is.
Do you do research of any sort? Has that ever been a thing?
No. I've really not publishing in academic journals. I have published 4 articles on cannabis. Brief articles in a online publication. But no.
Are you going to be working on anything like that in the foreseeable?
I think I'm going to get involved with the business of cannabis more.
Oh, excellent.
I've asked to come back and teach at Evergreen. However, I'm not sure that they'll ask me to come back and teach. This will be summer next year. Teach another edition, the 6th edition of the business of cannabis. I'd like to do that, but we'll see how it goes. We'll see what happens with COVID-19.
Yeah.
A lot of things are very different and ever changing, and so who knows what will be on the menu.
Do we get to call it COVID 2020, or is it just always going to be 19?
I think it's always going to be COVID-19, but new coronaviruses can occur, and new social crises can occur.
That's true.
Lots of things can happen, and as we've seen, 9 months from now, which is when the beginning of the Evergreen's 2021 summer session would occur, lots of things can happen in 9 months.
Yeah.
Both at the college and with me and in general.
Well, thanks for showing up and sharing.
Are we allowed to shake hands?
Yeah, okay.
All right. All right. We'll break out the hand sanitizer after.
Yeah, we will.
All right. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you. Do you need you want a drink or anything like that?
Yeah, you got a Diet Coke?
I have. That's very specific.